Welcome to another video lecture of Mr. Mosher's American History 8. This particular video lecture is going to look on, again, the Native Americans' experience during Western expansion, primarily on the Great Plains. And today's focus is going to look on the tensions that are going to occur and some of the conflicts that are going to take place as Western migration and Western expansion begin to kind of unfold here. So let's talk here a little bit about the tensions on the plains. The reading for this particular lecture series will come from Chapter 18, Section 2, pages 593 to 598 out of our history textbook. The guiding questions for today's particular lecture series will be, why was the Black Hills important to the Sioux? Why was it important to the Americans? And then what happened at the Battle of Little Bighorn? The story for today really is can be summed up maybe as, today is a good day to die, which was a Sioux slogan, a Sioux phrase that was sometimes used before going into battle. And there's going to be three particular individuals that we're going to kind of listen to and learn about in this particular lecture series, which is Lieutenant Colonel George Custer, Chief Crazy Horse, Chief Sitting Bull. And we're going to look kind of at this idea of Sioux resistance. Broken promises. This has been kind of a recurring theme here with westward expansion. By the 1850s, Americans will start to settle and move through the Great Plains region. At the Treaty of Fort Laramie, the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1851, the Sioux, the Northern Cheyenne, and the Arapaho were given a large area of land known as the Black Hills, which is in modern-day South Dakota, parts of northern Nebraska, and parts of Wyoming. The chief who helped secure many of these treaties was a chief known as Chief Red Cloud. The Native Americans, the Sioux, living in that part of America, was very concerned by all the westward groups that were moving across their land and were kind of getting into their way of their hunting grounds. And so Chief Red Cloud asked that trail that these explorers were going to be closed. And so after years of conflict between the Native Americans and these groups going west, it was decided on by the U.S. government that it was just easier to close the forts. And in 1868, the Lakota agreed to live basically in the Great Sioux Reservation along the Black Hills, and they agreed that the U.S. government would give them some supplies that would be used for the help assist them in that transition of moving on the reservation. Those supplies never get there, which is an unfortunate reality that happened pretty frequently in a lot of these treaties between the Native Americans and the U.S. government, that supplies were sometimes promised and they just were never really delivered there. Chief Red Cloud actually makes a trip all the way to Washington, D.C. to talk to the president at the time, President Ulysses S. Grant, and is reassured that these supplies are coming, but they really don't ever get there. The Black Hills was a very important aspect of the Lakota, of the Sioux. It was sort of their spiritual center. It was very, very important to them in terms of their culture and religion, and it was something that was very precious to them, which is why they just agreed if they were going to move on to a land area, a reservation, that they would go to that particular spot. However, in 1874, that's going to change, unfortunately, rather drastically, because there's gold discovered in 1874. And pretty soon, thousands of miners begin moving into the Black Hills regions. And the U.S. government, realizing that they can't stop them, they're not going to try to stop them, offers to buy the land from the Lakota and force them onto a different reservation. The Lakota leaders reject that offer. Remember, this is very sacred land to them. This is very, very important to them. Two leaders of the Sioux tribe, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, decide to take some of their followers, some of the tribe members, and actually leave off the Black Hills Reservation and go back into the areas of Montana and Wyoming and to go back to their nomadic lifestyle. So between 1875 and 1876, they basically are fleeing the reservation and are on the loose out in the Great Western High Plains. The U.S. military is sent in after them to try to bring them back by force, if necessary, back onto the reservation. And in 1876, a battle will ensue called the Battle of Little Bighorn. The Battle of Little Bighorn will be between the 7th U.S. Cavalry, led by Colonel George Armstrong Custer, where he will meet several thousands of Sioux and other tribes. The Cheyenne and Arapaho will be kind of in that group as well, near the Little Bighorn River in Montana. In less than a few hours, Custer and his men are all killed. About 211 men plus will be killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn. It really was the worst U.S. military defeat on the Great Plains War, and a huge victory for the Sioux. Despite this victory, however, It will not be a success story for the Sioux. Eventually, they will be driven back onto the reservation. Chief Sitting Bull will flee to Canada. Crazy Horse will be actually surrender and arrested and sent to Fort Robertson, Nebraska, where he will be killed by U.S. soldiers while at the fort. So throughout westward expansion and migration, tribes did resist. Native American peoples did resist this westward expansion, and they did fight back. They did try to prevent this idea of Americans moving onto their land and onto their territory, and it led to a great deal of conflict. And no greater was the conflict than on the Great Plains between the Lakota Sioux and the U.S. cavalry and the U.S. settlers as they moved into the West. Despite these tensions and conflicts, eventually this Lakota will end up on the reservations. And we're going to find out in our next lecture series on how and why that occurs. Thank you for listening. If you have questions, please make sure you ask. Have a great day.